Well, hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Noelle Trent, the Director of Interpretation Collections and Education here at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, November 2020 was an eventful month. Kamala Harris was elected vice president, but it was also the 60th anniversary of Ruby Bridges' integration of the William B. Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans, Louisiana. This iconic moment was captured by film and print media, but most notably by American artist Norman Rockwell in The Problem We All Live With. Today, we are pleased to have the National Civil Rights Museum's 2015 Freedom Award honoree and civil rights icon, Ruby Bridges Hall, with us. We're also excited to have the accomplished New York Times bestselling author, advocate, and vice chair of the Clinton Foundation, Chelsea Clinton. Together, these two dynamic women have been staunch advocates for literacy and education for all children. They're going to discuss Ruby's iconic moment, the civil rights movement, and the future for young girls. So, welcome, ladies.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Let me kick it off. Chelsea, everyone knows you as the former first daughter. And in recent years, you've become an accomplished author who highlights the stories of women and girls in this country. Why do those stories matter, and why was Ruby's story so compelling?
And well, Noelle, thank you so much into the museum for having us here today in virtual space. I very much wish we could all be together in Memphis, and hope that day is not too far away from us. So I first learned about Ruby Bridges' just amazing heroism and courage when I was a student at Horseman Junior High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, for my 7th grade history teacher, Coach Ramsey. He was also the football coach. I was not on the football team, so I can't attest to his skills there. But he was a great history teacher, and he really thought it was important that we understood the history of our school, Horseman, which now is called a middle school. But when I was there, was a junior high school. But decades before had been the all-black high school in Little Rock, Arkansas, that the Little Rock Nine, the 9 courageous Black students who integrated Little Rock Central High School in 1957, had studied it before going to Central. And so not only did he talk about the history of our school, he talked about the history of integration of public schools across the South, and shared the stories of the incredibly brave children who stood up to hate and to bigotry and to the totality of American history, for their right to go to school, and ultimately for the rights of kids across the country, especially Black kids and kids of color across the country to go to school. So I grew up kind of with the heroism and the kind of inspiration of Ruby Bridges, thanks to having great teachers, and in this instance, admittedly one special teacher. And so, kind of jumping forward into time, when I was thinking about the stories that I wanted my kids to grow up with, and especially the stories that I wanted young people to grow up with, and how important I thought it was that our daughters and our sons grow up with stories of courageous, powerful, and persistent women and girls, and decided one of the ways I would do that would be through writing picture books. I knew that I had to include Ruby Bridges because she had been such an important figure in my life as a kid, and I'm like, really starstruck to be in virtual space together here at the moment, and just am so thankful that I've been able to share her story with so many young readers. And this morning, when I was talking to my kids, who are 6, 4, and 1, so really I was more talking with my 6 and 4-year-old, and my 1-year-old was just sort of babbling in the background. I said, "You know what I get to do today?" And they said, "What?" I said, "Oh my gosh, I get to have a conversation with Ruby Bridges. Do you know who Ruby Bridges is?" And they both looked at me and they were like, "Yes." Like, you told us about her. I think even my 4-year-old like rolled his eyes at me and was like, "Yes, Mom." He's like 60 years ago. And I was like, "Okay, good. All right, you're paying attention. You can finish a bowl of Cheerios." So that's a probably way too long, but honest answer to your question, Noelle.
So Ruby, what is your response to that? What does it mean to you to hear kids be that enthusiastic and know who you are and your story?
I am always so humbled when I hear stories like that, and especially Chelsea coming from you and um, your life in public service. To know, well, I have to also say that I feel much, much older than I am. But I get that all the time. I think when I meet people and they say, oh my God, I studied you when I was in elementary school. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm much older than I appear to be. But I am always humbled by that because I was 6 years old and had no idea what I was venturing into. But I do know that what I've tried to do all my life is to take that experience and share it with other young people, boys and girls, but particularly girls, because I want to inspire young women. You know, for me, it seems like from the beginning of time, women were always in the background. Or, I was raised in a family where the women took care of the house. My mother sharecropped and wasn't able to go to school to get a formal education. So I am like you. I am very persistent when it comes to actually inspiring young women, helping them to understand that they too can be great, and not just indoors, but outside of the home as well. So I was so moved when I was included in your book, She Persisted, to think that, me coming from where I've come from, here I am amongst these other 12 women, and coming from you growing up in the White House and your father being the president of the United States. You have to understand what an impact that had on me. And I'm sure how it inspires young women today. So I thank you for that. And I have to say that you have to continue your work because it is really, really important to every young girl, every young girl.
Well, I think, you know, Noelle, just listening to also, Ruby reflect on her, on her life and on um, what it means to her when kind of young people and especially kids say like, oh, I learned about you in history. Um, I do think it is important for young people to recognize like this history was not that long ago. I mean, I know you're saying like you don't feel that old, like you're not like this, like this was not that long ago. And I think we're living through a moment where clearly the stories that we tell our children, who we include in those stories, who has agency in those stories, kind of clearly really matters. Because I have thought a lot in the last few weeks, like, as admittedly I've thought a lot in the last few years, like, wow, like not only did you learn very different lessons in Sunday school at church than I did, but you also clearly grew up like with a very different set of values and stories and an understanding of who um, should be included like in our collective story.
No, you're absolutely right about that. And I think about that a lot myself. I think about where I am today and this role that I've taken on. Because even though that, you're right, it wasn't that long ago. Even though it happened in 1960, it sort of lay dormant for a while. And I always say that it was allowing me an opportunity to catch up with myself and, who I was going to grow into. And once that happened, I really felt like it was my responsibility to take that experience and try and share it with young people because it was such an important lesson for me. There I was thrust into the middle of the civil rights movement and seeing a mob of people out in front of the school that did not look like me. I had no idea that they were there to keep me out. You know, thank God it happened in a city where we had Mardi Gras, and I really thought that that's what was happening that day. I got caught up in a parade. But what was really happening is that, you know, what was protecting me was the innocence of a child going through that. And then to get inside of this building and have it be emptied out because I just walked in. And then every day, you know, being greeted by a woman that looked really, really different to me because I'd gone to an all Black school where everybody in my school looked exactly like me. And yet here was a woman every day greeting me with a smile and open arms, ready to embrace me and teach me. And yet she looked exactly like the mob outside. You know, the lesson for me that year actually shaped me into who I am today and prepared me for this work. And that was seeing her and knowing that she looked exactly like that mob, you know, that was mean and angry about something, that she wasn't like them at all, that she showed me her heart, and she made me feel safe and loved. And I so enjoyed learning from her that I never wanted to miss a day. And when you talk about persisting, I knew every day once that car door opened that all I needed to do was to think about something good and get through the crowd, and then I was going to have a good day. And it was because of her. So that lesson taught me that we can't look at one another and judge each other, especially by the color of our skin or religion or wherever we come from. That we do ourselves a disservice if we don't allow ourselves to get to know that person. And right now, today, with everything that we're faced with in this country, that is a very, very important message. And so when you and your mom got together and wrote Gutsy Women, and there I was, I'm like, oh my God. You know, the one thing about, I think, this work, it's not an application that you fill out. You know, it's a calling. And once you submit to that, and you know, it's an agreement between you and your maker that this is what you're going to dedicate your life to. There's no turning back. And even when we have our hands filled, like you do now with 3 babies, you know, there was a time when I was on the road almost every day and raising my sons, and really feeling guilty about that. But at the end of the day, I knew that I made a commitment to do this, and that it was something that I had to do. And it brought me back to thinking about Dr. King and probably even your parents. I mean, with everything that they had to endure and face just to be in public service. Surely there were days when they didn't feel like doing that. But it is a commitment. And so when I saw Gutsy Women, you know, it probably happened on a day when I was feeling really down about something. And there it was. It was like a gift. I opened it up and there was your note. And there I was, a part of this. And it just inspired me to say, you have to continue to do this. So those books not only inspire young children, they still, I'm sure, inspire women like myself who are weary sometimes, but know that this is what you're called to do. So I just want to say thank you so much. It is indeed an honor. I think that we are probably on the same path. I should say the same journey, different paths, but we're headed in the same direction. So I'm so honored.
Well, Me too. Me too. And I love seeing the Ruby Bridges Elementary School sign behind you. It makes me so happy because I find it, I mean, if I'm cynical, I don't find it bewildering, but if I'm trying to not be cynical, then I can find it bewildering why some people continue to say that like the names of our children's schools or the statues that our kids see in public parks, like somehow can just be branded history, and that makes them impotent or kind of unaffecting when we know that what we name is what we privilege and what we accept and what we even celebrate. And I think that is especially true where our kids go to school. So I just am, I'm so happy to see you kind of with your sign signifying your school in every sense on the screen.
Well, thank you. And you have to know that was, it's funny because, I've always been told that you're really not celebrated in your own hometown, so to speak. And I fought really, really hard to try to restore the school that I integrated. It was hit by Hurricane Katrina and needed to be restored. And they were talking about tearing it down. So I worked really, really hard to make sure that did not happen. And we were able to put it on the national registry. So when it came time to think about, well, are we going to leave it William Frantz Elementary or we're going to name it something else? And what we were told here in Louisiana and New Orleans that, well, you have to be deceased before your name can be put on a public building.
You've already sacrificed enough. You definitely,
right.
glad that was not something where you were like, oh.
I thought to myself, no, I don't think it's that important to me. But lo and behold, months later, I got this call and, it was from Alameda, California. And they said, we're building a new school and we are actually combining 3 schools in this one school. And we've chosen your name to be on the building. And I was just blown away. And you have to understand, again, thinking about where I've come from and where my parents came from. And to turn that corner one day, and there was my name on a school, I burst into tears and started praying and saying that, I understand what my role is. I know how important it is. So, our journey isn't always clear to us, but I think if we are obedient to the commitments that we've made to try and leave this place better than what we found it, that your path will become clear. And at least that's what's happened to me along the way. So thank you for acknowledging that. I am so excited about it. And now I have another school last year. That's the second Ruby Bridges Elementary in Seattle.
Great.
Kids are so proud of that because what they celebrate by using my name is their diversity.
Yes.
And clearly that's what we all should be celebrating.
Yeah, matters. I went to Booker T. Washington Elementary School, which was like the public kind of math and science kind of elementary school in my neighborhood, and it matters, right? Because I then learned about like Booker T. Washington, who I think was probably the first scientist I really learned about because his name was on my school.
Right.
So again, like just the stories we tell our kids and the stories that get centered for our kids really matter.
Well, that's going to bring me to your parents because I remember visiting your father's library and being like, especially one of those rooms I walked into, it felt just like his office there. And, you know, that, what does that feel like for you when you see, I mean, even though you've grown up, you know, part of your life in the White House, but, you know, you grew up in Little Rock, and then now I think the library, your father's library, also the Clinton School of Public Service. I've had an opportunity to go there and speak. That was an amazing place, and the work that they do there. And then now your mother has a library named after her, I think, a children's library, isn't it?
Children's Library in Little Rock.
Yes. So does all of that inspire you? Because, and the reason why I really want to ask this, I'm trying not to be selfish and just ask the questions that I want to know, but does all of that inspire you to do the work that you do? Does it make you feel like you have these huge shoes to fill? And the reason why I ask that is because, you know, I'm the mother of 4 sons, and we struggle with that because I sort of feel like they feel they have to fill my shoes. And I'm thinking that's probably harder for them because they're men. And to fill the shoes of a woman, we struggle with that. So I guess I'm just asking.
Yeah, I'm happy to share in that I am I'm grateful that my parents like set high expectations for me. They both, as a student when I was little, I was expected to like do my homework, um, be on time. I don't know if I could have claimed perfect attendance every year, but some years hopefully, and certainly, you know, to be a good kid, to be respectful, to do my chores at home, to always be, you know, deferential to my grandparents, especially, and to my elders. They also expected me to be a citizen. So I remember the first thing I learned to read was the newspaper. Um, I remember when my dad was running for governor in 1986, I remember having kind of debates around the breakfast table or the dinner table. Um, I remember, you know, my parents, though, also always kind of sharing stories of their friends or of people that they really looked up to who were doing work that they admired outside of politics. So kind of people who were like my mother was the chair, you know, of the Legal Aid Society. So, you know, talking about all the lawyers who were doing important kind of civil rights work and public service work, although not in formal politics, you know, doctors and nurses and healthcare workers, journalists, writers, artists. And so I think thankfully, you know, I always very much felt a lot of pressure kind of to meet these kind of clear expectations of kind of be a good student, be respectful, keep your room clean, kind of, you know, think, right, kind of things along those lines. And then also kind of the high expectation of be engaged, like leave the world a better place. And yet,
Right.
thankfully, I had through my lived experience of the people that my parents kind of brought into my life, also the stories my parents told me. I mean, I've talked a lot about this in the context of She Persisted. The first like 2 stories I really remember my mom and my maternal grandmother talking to me about were Helen Keller and Harriet Tubman. You know, so I just in the stories that were centered in my life and the kind of community that I grew up in, there were thankfully uh, people who were leaving the world better in many different ways. And I think because my parents exposed me to those many different ways, they all felt really valid and valuable. And so I very much felt this and still feel like, you know, in total honesty, like quite an intense pressure
Right.
to be a good person, to be a good friend, to be a good daughter, still most importantly, to be a good mother, a good partner to my husband, and also to to do good, to be good in the world. And yet, thankfully, while I still feel that pressure, I feel like, oh, I can do that now as an activist and an advocate. I can do that as an author. I can do that kind of through my teaching at the Maryland School of Public Health at Columbia. I can do that through the way that I support my friends who have creative talents that, despite many years of schooling and effort, like I will never be able to approach kind of in their kind of gifts into the world. And so while I still feel kind of the anxiety, I guess, or the energy maybe of what more can and should I be doing? What more must I be doing? How do I manifest this calling that I also feel to make a difference? I don't feel like I have to be my parents to do that. And I think thankfully I don't feel that way really, though, because of the way they parented me. And I am very aware of that now as a parent. And certainly for my children, I want them to understand like the work that I do, and I hope to be proud of me and to be proud of their grandparents too. But we also are trying to, especially through the books we read, show that there are so many ways to make a difference, whether you're a teacher or a scientist, or you're a farmer, or you're an inventor, you're an activist, or you're, in public service as a politician. Because I don't want them to feel like, oh, I now have to be a writer to be successful, or I have to go into politics to be kind of successful in being a good person in the world. I want them to instead think, oh, I have to be a good person in the world. Then what do I have to do to be successful, to be that?
Exactly.
Thinking
Right.
of it the other way around.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense because I know that we struggled with that. And maybe for me, it was just the male female tug of war too. But you're absolutely right. I think the books we write and how we want to inspire young people and actually showing them different examples of people that have made a difference will hopefully allow them to understand that they too can, no matter what it is. But the most important thing is to be a good person. Um, so you're absolutely right about that. That was something that I wondered about. And because, like me, I see that, you are doing work with the foundation, you are raising your kids, you are writing books, who knows what else that you're involved in. People always ask me, how do you keep that up? And how do you juggle all of that? But for me, I don't know. Sort of feel like there's lots of things coming toward me. I have to pick and choose what it is I want to do in the hopes that it all fits into this one piece of pie so that I'm not chasing after all the balls.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, all these things that I do sort of will help me to fulfill that calling. And that is to inspire young people. And so from the way you just explained it to me, it sounds like that's what you're doing too.
Certainly what I hope to do. Certainly what I hope to do. Yes.
Okay, well, that helps me quite a bit. Now I don't feel as guilty.
No. Well, and I'm sure, yeah, I'm sure they're very proud of you. I can't imagine they're very proud of you.
No, they are. It's just that, sometimes you tend to feel like, oh my God, my parents or parent is bigger than life, and I have to fulfill their shoes. So and definitely, I so admire your parents that I was just wondering, and then being the only child, because I'm the oldest, and that brings on a lot of pressure as well. So that was the reason why I wanted to know that.
Well, and I think there is the reality too. I mean, when you when you have written and spoken about how like you didn't realize when you were walking into school, you were like walking into the history books. I think, you know, when my, certainly when my father decided to run for president and when my mom decided to, run for president is just sort of the most prominent examples of their kind of public service, but very, very, very far from the only kind of examples of their public service and their service kind of to the public and in the public domain. I do think it's very different when you make those decisions as an adult, right? Versus, as you said, like you were protected by your innocence,
Yes.
and yet you were still such enormously brave at 6 years old, and have still continued to have such a profound life of service. I do think, though, this is so presumptuous, but I would imagine it is different when you kind of grow up with those choices that you've made and then continue to make those choices versus kind of, my parents who made those choices as an adult. And I think there is an important difference there.
For me, I would have to say making those choices was really about what you just mentioned. What would always come to mind is this the right thing to do? Am I doing the good thing? I think ultimately it will boil down to that one choice. As you said, first and foremost, you want to be a good person. And that's really what you want to pass on to your kids. And if that is the guideline, then all those other choices will fall in place. And for me, I always say, what I know that I've tried really, really hard to do and be is, well, to be obedient to, who I believe that higher power is, my maker is. And that in itself will be the guideline for me being a good person. So when it comes time to really make those choices, there's only one way to go for me. And that's what I've tried to do in everything that I set out to do. And that's not all, that is probably the hardest thing to do, to be honest with you, because especially today, there's so much out there influencing young people. And it tends to make those choices really harder for them. So yes, it started for me at 6 years old, but as I said, there was a time when that was kind of swept under the rug, and I had to go through life and make those choices, and not always made the right ones, but after growing up and realizing what it was I really wanted to do, it was like that 6-year-old self resurfaced again. And the path was already laid out for me. And all I needed to do at that point is continue to stay on it. And that's what I've been doing. What I want to ask too is about the women around you. I know it was your mom. Like for me, and this might be the same for you too, is that I was a daddy's girl. So my father was my hero. He was the one who believed in me the most. And but then I lost my father when I was 21. So that was a huge life change for me. But then also growing up, I was very close to my grandmother. And my grandmother really, really inspired me. She was the sharecropper of the family. And we all went back to Mississippi to visit my grandmother every summer with about 40 cousins. And so for me, that was my summer camp. But those two people inspired me so much. So I guess what I want to ask is, when you were little and growing up, what about the women around you? I mean, surely it was your mom, but was there anybody else?
Definitely my mom. And I will talk about my grandmothers, but I also just have to say I was so lucky to have great teachers. Um, my first grade teacher, Mrs. Mitchell, I'm still in touch with her today. She went on to
Wow.
become the assistant superintendent of the Little Rock School District. So just gonna brag on her. She's since retired. Um, I could name like all of my elementary school teachers and most of my middle school and high school teachers. I had Mrs. Porter in fourth grade. She also was an amazing teacher. And so I really I looked up to my teachers. My pediatrician was a woman, Dr. Betty Lowe, when I was a kid. And I mentioned that because when my mom and I were working on Gutsy Women, we realized how I had grown up really surrounded by women in my life who were my role models, who were, teachers and doctors, sometimes people who were friends of my parents, and sometimes who were, present in my own life. And yet, certainly, I think the most important answer to your question about women who've inspired me, alongside my mom, really were my grandmothers. My dad's mom unfortunately passed away when I was 13, so I didn't get to know her as an adult. I have so many wonderful memories of her, though, when I was a child. She lived in Hot Springs, and I would spend at least a weekend a month with her. And I loved kind of being with her and kind of playing in the yard with her and working on crafts with her, and her trying to teach me how to cook and bake to various degrees of success, and going to church with her, and then going to her favorite motel restaurant that had French toast with powdered sugar on it after church. And sometimes some of her friends would join us. And I have this very vivid memory of one of her friends telling me to like not drink water or orange juice out of a straw because I was going to get wrinkles. And I remember thinking, like, I'm 5. Like, why are you telling me I need to worry about wrinkles? But it's like, I think it was like a Southern ladies of a certain generation.
Right.
Admittedly. So I have like all these like wonderful memories. She also, she kept her house very cold, which I later really, I think, understood was because she could afford air conditioning, which had not been true for much of
Right.
her life. And she could afford air conditioning, and it was a real kind of subtle sign of what she had achieved in her life. I mean, my dad's first home was a home with a dirt floor and an outhouse. And so the fact that, she put herself through nursing school, she became a nurse anesthetist, kind of her husband, when I was young, was this wonderful man. He worked in food distribution, and that they could afford to air condition their house, I think, was really important to them. I didn't understand that as a kid, though. I just thought, like, I called her Grandma Ginger. I was like, why is it
Right.
always so cold? And she would say like one of two things. She would either say, you can always put more clothes on, but you can't take your skin off. Hard to refute when you're a kid. Or she would look at me like so earnestly, and she would say, God made hell hot for a reason. And so also as a little kid, I was like, oh my gosh, like, what do I say to that? I don't know what to say to that. But she was full of so much life, and her life ended far too soon. And then my mom's mom was really the most important person in my life alongside my parents for a very, very long time. I mean, my husband jokes how like the first time he met my grandmother, my grandma Dorothy, that it was like the most nervous he'd ever been, that he knew I could probably withstand if my parents didn't quite approve. But if my grandmother didn't approve, he knew he had no chance.
He was in trouble.
Which is actually probably 100% accurate. And I spoke to her, especially after I graduated from graduate school, and I moved back to the US from after I'd been at Oxford. I spoke to her every day. And sometimes we would, talk for a minute, and sometimes we would talk for an hour. And she gave just the best hugs. And she, had had a life that I couldn't imagine, in part because of the choices that she'd made. She was, born to teenage parents who were not equipped to take care of her. They abandoned her for the first time when she was 3. It was her first memory. They left her with the key to the apartment and a meal card to the cafeteria down the street and said, if you need anything, like, go to the fire department. And they came back a few days later, but that was certainly not the last time they would leave her. And then when she was 8, they put her on a train with her younger sister from Chicago to Los Angeles, and by herself, to live with her father's parents. And then when she was 13, right before her 14th birthday, they told her she had to go out and support herself. So she got a job working as a maid and what she called a mother's helper in someone else's home. And she, would wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do housework and get 3 younger kids ready for school. She would go to school, come back, take care of them, get them ready for bed, put them to bed, do her homework, get up and do it all over again the next morning. And she graduated with honors, and she met my grandfather while she was working as a secretary, and they got married and had my mom and her 2 younger brothers. And my mom, I grew up in this home full of such love and support and possibility that my grandmother just had to imagine into existence, because it certainly hadn't been her own lived experience with her parents or her grandparents. And so, and she thought it was really important that I understand where she had come from, but there was no self-pity and there was no kind of sense that I somehow should feel guilty for that. But there was a sense I should feel responsible for continuing this kind of legacy of love and support. And I have a deep gratitude and admiration for her. And I still miss her every day. She passed away almost a decade ago, and I miss her every day, and I think about her every single day.
So we also have that in common, because my grandmother was a very strong influence in my life. So having that, and then we have these different backgrounds, but here we are, we end up, on the same path, the same journey, even the age difference between us. What I want to talk about is how the civil rights movement actually influenced my life. Even at 6 years old, I thought that going up those stairs and going through what I went through during that time was something that just happened in my neighborhood, an incident that happened just on my street. Not knowing anything about the civil rights movement happening around me, around the country, not really knowing anything about that. Growing up in a home where neither one of my parents had a formal education. So it wasn't like they were discussing those issues, around the dinner table or anything. So it took me a while, and before I came to realize just how important that event was for me. And that happened when I was about 17 years old. And it was the very first time that I'd seen the Norman Rockwell painting. And a reporter came to interview me and showed it to me and said, "Do you realize that this is you?" And I didn't. I hadn't seen it. And at that moment, it helped me to understand just how important that walk was. It made me realize that this wasn't something that just happened in my community. It was something that actually changed the face of education around the country. Seeing that painting helped me to understand how important it was, and I think also helped me to understand who I was. Because being 6, a child would ask, well, why did I have to endure this and go through this. And seeing that painting actually answered that for me. I then wanted to study the civil rights movement, but you also have to understand I grew up in a time when we didn't have Black History Month. And when we think about the books that we were using at the time, you know, we only studied a little bit about Dr. King and maybe touched on Rosa Parks, but that was it. And so there was so much about that time that wasn't made available to me, you know, and I had so many questions about myself and how that happened and why it happened to me, how I was chosen, things that my parents weren't educated enough to even answer for me. So it put me on this quest to actually want to learn more about the civil rights movement. And the only place that I could find the truth and all those answers, I remember was the very first time that I had an opportunity to visit the Civil Rights Museum in Birmingham. And it was like walking back in time, and all the questions that I had were right there under that roof. I could see all of these people and understand what all of that history was about, and that it was real and true. It wasn't where something was omitted. You know, I got to see all of the faces of the civil rights movement. And it made so much sense to me. And so, you know, when I think about that, I think about my partnership with the Civil Rights Museum there in Memphis. And I remember my first visit there, and the way that it's set up, where you're on this path. And by the time you see every exhibit, you end up standing in the footsteps of Dr. King right in his bedroom. And you can overlook the balcony where he was shot. And it was like I arrived there by chance, but I was following a path and didn't realize that that's where it was going to take me. You know, the museum is an amazing place, and definitely amazing to me, because it's like my life opened up in a museum where all of the answers that I'd been looking for was right there before me. And so I wonder how many other kids probably feel the same way. And partly because history isn't being taught the way that history happened. We all know that. And if you tell part of the truth and omit other parts of it, then what you're left with is pretty much a lie. And, you know, that's what I want to change. And when, you know, you and I are in the business of inspiring young people and writing books, and for me, making books available to kids, you know, my partnership with the Civil Rights Museum is about giving away books. You know, also being 6 years old and being a part of that movement, I was very, very fortunate that people would send me books in the mail. My parents couldn't afford books. I grew up in a house where we didn't have books. But because I was Ruby Bridges and I had an integrated school, I would get all these books in the mail. And my favorite books were Dr. Seuss. So I just, oh my God, I remember every month going to the mailbox and there was another Dr. Seuss book. And so that's why I'm so passionate about illustrated books. It just allowed me to escape what was really happening. And so that's part of the reason why I love illustrated books, and I love being able to give books away. So my partnership with the museum is really, really important to me. Even though I'm writing books just as you are, how do we make sure that those, and they're still kids today, we know that are in homeless shelters, that are homeless on the streets. How do we make sure that we give away as many books as possible? how do we do that?
Well, we, at the Clinton Foundation, through our Too Small to Fail initiative, which includes a partnership with the National Diaper Bank, try to meet families where they are, including, um, the, many, many families in our country for whom, diapers alone could cost more than 10% of their monthly income, and who rely on diaper banks to be able to ensure that their children are being kept safe and healthy and being given the dignity of not having to be in a dirty diaper. And we've given away more than 1 million books through our partnerships, not only with the National Diaper Bank Network, but also with many food pantries, especially during COVID-19, when families are, at home, to try to help in a safe way ensure that they're able to have more books kind of coming into their home by meeting families where they're already spending time. Because certainly, I do think illustrated books are hugely important. It's often kind of the first way we say to kids, like, here's where you're visible or here's where you're not, or it's where we help kids understand, like through Dr. Seuss, especially, like reading can be fun. Like you can laugh while you're reading,
Yes.
enjoy reading. And we know that if kids enjoy reading when they're little, they're far more likely to be lifelong readers. And that's certainly what I hope for every child. So I couldn't agree more that it's important that we all do everything we can through all of our partnerships and all of our work to try to ensure that more kids just have more books.
Well, that was part of the reason why I really wanted to have this conversation, so that together, hopefully kids will be able to see our conversation and know that we are working diligently to inspire and promote reading and literacy, and that we are out there, making sure that those who can't afford books actually get them. And I've, studied and followed your work and what you do. And I always, always have admired your parents. And so I just felt like this conversation would be a great conversation for them to see and know that we are working behind the scenes together to make sure that they are inspired and that they can actually have some sort of escape through books. So
well,
I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I will certainly, I'll share this conversation with my parents, but also with my kids. And I think every kid should visit the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis.
Oh, yes.
Look forward to bringing my children once it is safe for us to even just leave our home whenever
Absolutely.
that may be.
I know that we're all waiting for that, but I really appreciate this time that we've been able to spend together. I've learned so much, and I hope that I've shared something with you. But I just want to say, I heard this term, is it pre-sisterhood? Is that how you say it?
The persisterhood.
Persisterhood. Yes. So I feel like I'm part of that club, and I am so grateful for that. So
well, it's been my honor.
Yes. Thank you. So Noelle, is there something else that you want to bring up?
I have enjoyed this conversation. Before I close it out, is there anything else that you guys wanted to hit on? I think we covered everything we kind of essentially we're looking to talk about. Chelsea, did you want to say anything about I don't think we have anything like a good segment of you saying anything about the significance of the civil rights movement history and why these stories have to be told?
I'm happy to talk about that. I think one of the reasons it's so important that we bring our kids to this National Civil Rights Museum is so that history is inescapable, and that our kids feel a responsibility for changing the course of history. Because I think that certainly right now, as Ruby Bridges, who is so uniquely, I think, positioned to say this, acknowledged earlier, like the way that we currently like teach history leaves a lot out, and what's left is unhelpful and only kind of further entrenching inequities and inequalities. And I think, we need to kind of look to our institutions that provide a more complete and a more honest reckoning of where we've been and kind of how we got to where we are, to help equip young people kind of with that honest grounding, to then help kind of push us forward. Because certainly, we talk in our own family, and I know I've been criticized for having conversations with my kids that some people think like I shouldn't be having with my kids, and they think they're too little and I should just let them like play with their magnetiles or their Legos, or only live in the world of Dr. Seuss. And yeah, like I let my kids play with magnetiles and Legos, and we love Dr. Seuss. But they're people in the world, and they're small, but that doesn't mean they're not citizens. And they have a very, I think, real responsibility already, to be kind, to stand up to bullies, and to practice that now, because as they get older, I do want them to stand up to bigger bullies and to stand up to bigger inequalities and bigger inequities. And I think that for too long, kind of the work of civil rights especially has been, the burden has been on Black Americans, when we know that really it is white Americans who need to radically change our expectations, our understanding of our own history, to kind of stand up and fight for voting rights, civil rights, equal rights, ensure that those fights, while achieved kind of in law, are also then actualized in culture, in norms, in workplaces, in worship places, in public spaces, and kind of anywhere and everywhere that we spend time. And I think we have to start that work when our kids are young. And I think we have to ensure that work also never stops.
And you're absolutely right about that. That work started for me when I was 6, and I'm still learning today at 66. So I don't think it's never too early to start. Just the books that you have written proves that. You know,
Well,
it you know it's about taking history and real life and animating it and making it fun, but when all that is stripped away, it's still the truth, and that's what's important.
well, and I think too, I mean, on January 6th, we had a white nationalist and violent insurrection at our nation's capital. I mean, we had, the Confederate flag, and, merchandise celebrating Auschwitz, like in our hallowed halls of Congress. Images that we didn't see in the Civil War or World War II, that in 2021 were there blithely and even joyfully. And we talked about that with our kids. And I know they're small at 6 and 4, but this is their history too. And they, I think, need to understand what we have permitted to happen in our country.
Yes, even though it happened, it is history. And what we should understand about that is that if we don't learn from our history, we're doomed to repeat it. And I think that's what happened on January 6th. So
And because I wanted them to understand too why I was so happy and relieved, also then by what happened on January 20th. And you know, of course representation isn't everything, and yet of course also representation really matters. Like, it really matters that Kamala Harris is our vice president. And it really matters to me that my kids understand why that matters. And it also really matters to me that they understand that, like, hopefully now we can move from just trying to stop bad things from happening, to move back into the work, the affirmative work of trying to push for more good things happening, whether that's in education. So, more kids can have more teachers like Miss Henry, and
Yes.
whether it's in, trying to save our planet, or kind of anything else that that young people especially care about and that touches their lives.
You're absolutely right. Well, this conversation has left me hopeful, because I now know that we're both on the right path and doing what it is we're supposed to be doing.
Well,
And
I'm so humbled to be with you. I mean, someone that I've looked up to since I was a little girl.
Well,
And
well,
I'm
thank you.
incredibly grateful to the National Civil Rights Museum for bringing us together today. So thank you, Noelle.
Yes.
oh, well,
Thank you, Noelle. I know that lots of young people will see this and will be inspired by it. And that means that we have done our work for today.
well, thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
ladies. This was great. I think that there are as you were talking, I was just thoroughly enraptured with the conversation. But what came to mind as you were talking was I guess it was 2016, 2017, Ruby, at the reading festival, that we had a surprise performance by these young kids. And the girl who portrayed you after the performance said, "Thank you so much. You made all these things possible so I could have an education and I could pursue that." And there's this great picture or video that we have of you embracing her and these other children around that moment. And then I guess a couple weeks ago, I saw a photo of Mina Harris's granddaughter with your mom, and she had heard all about Hillary Clinton, and so she had a mask on, but you could see that she was smiling from ear to ear. And in both of these moments, I think that what's so powerful with the work that's being done is that there are these young girls now who are so appreciative of these groundbreaking women, and now know that there are these things that were obstacles for us. They're not even in their way. They can't conceive of it anymore. And I think that's a tribute to the work that's been done and the work that both of you are continuing to do. So thank you so much for taking time with us for this great conversation to commemorate the 60th anniversary of Ruby's integration of William B. Frantz Elementary School. Thank you, Chelsea, for taking time out of your schedule. We just appreciate you guys so much. And for those of you who are watching, stick with the National Civil Rights Museum. We have more digital programming coming forward. You can always visit our website at civilrightsmuseum.org.